How goes it?
About like this.
Yay. Right. Oh, it is. It is Saturday, January 9th, 11 a.m. Eastern Time, 11 p.m. Thailand or Bangkok. Where are you?
Yeah, Bangkok, something 7 UTC. I don't know. Sounds like a disease.
Yeah. All right. So that makes sense.
Yeah, UTC, UTI, whatever.
Well.
Audrey and Heather, hello.
Hello. Good morning. Sips coffee, morning yawns, and stretches. Yeah, I agree. It's weird. I've been sleeping, like sleeping. I know I've been eating righter, better, eating better, eating a lot less junk, and working out some. And I'm actually sleeping better and I'm writing better and all that kind of stuff. But for whatever reason, it's like somebody, I put it in my newsletter, as somebody had put it, the New Year's resolutions are basically a to-do list for the first 2 weeks of January.
Right.
I thought that was pretty funny. It's pretty accurate too. Hi, Paige.
There's a gym not far from my house. I just haven't gone. I like it when I start getting into it, but then I always get hurt like after a couple months, and then I stop.
Right. Hi, Lisa. Yeah, I mean, it's funny. When I was probably in the best shape of my life was I was living. It was here, but it was like 2009 or 10, something like that. I was pissed off because I had, kind of let myself go, and as I was playing hockey, just wasn't playing very well. I couldn't, keep my breath or anything else. So finally I got pissed off and I decided that's it. I'm fixing this problem. And so I spent, I think it was a good 6 to 9 months. I got down to like 182 muscle. I mean, I was doing 150 push-ups a day. I was running. it was nuts. I was going and playing hockey 3 times a week. I was on different leagues and all this kind of stuff. Plus, I was going to what they call stick and puck, where you just go to the rink and, I'm skating like crazy. I got in shape. And I mean, I was eating right, the whole thing. And I was playing in a game, and it was in a higher level of hockey, which I could never do because they didn't have the stamina. And man, I was killing it. I was scoring goals left and right. I was stopping guys I could never stop in the past. It's such a huge difference. And one night, just one fucking night, I reached out for the puck and my groin muscle went popped. And black and blue all the way down my leg. I couldn't walk. 3 months later, I'm back to the fat guy playing in the lower league.
Yeah.
So it was kind of like, damn it.
Yeah, I would always get in really good shape over the summer in college because I did newspaper and ate like junk because there's always deadlines and everything. Mm-hmm. But in the summer, I'd go to the gym 2 times a day. I'd walk and run for like 3 hours. Protein shakes, timed meals, everything. I was probably like half the size I am now and close to the same weight because of the muscle. And then school would start up and I'd, shove down 2 Papa John's pizzas a night. And then it's like, oh, well, yeah, that's how that happens.
Yeah, exactly. Ooh, look, soda.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's funny. During the week, I don't have any problem at all. Eating right. I have, we bought a wok about, I guess, 2 months ago now. And every day I cook, with vegetables and chicken or steak or tofu, which is tofu. But anyway, and it's, I don't go overboard with the sauces. It's just enough garlic and ginger and all that kind of stuff. So it's not too much sodium. It's not like, tons of sugar like you're used to getting at an actual Chinese food or Japanese food. And so it's just a hint, but it's really good. And it's been helping. I mean, as far as like losing weight is concerned, is the sodium a little high? Yeah, but it's not as high as ordering a pizza or Taco Bell every day. It's still better than that. And at least there's a lot of vegetables, that are going into it. And it's great. But then Saturday hits. Grubhub, and so everything you've done through the course of the week totally destroyed on the weekend.
Yeah, because my cheat meal used to be going to a hot pot, and that still was pretty good because it was boiling vegetables and everything like that. And then that place closed, and it's like, oh yeah, there's Pizza Hut right next to it.
Oh,
that'll be my cheat meal. Yeah, how can that go wrong? Cheese is protein, right? I mean,
it is protein, and actually, if you're going to get pizza, it's the cheese part's fine. It's when you start getting into the crust. So if you're like a deep dish guy, it's a problem. Yeah, but then I was doing this for a while before the pandemic started, and I was doing okay. This was last year. This was before I went to Scotland, actually, and it was so not last year, but 2019. Before I went to Scotland, and I had dropped down to my best weight. I think it was 194, which I hadn't been since 2014 or whatever, And hi, Julie. And so what I would do is once a week, Laura Lee loved this particular Mexican restaurant. So I'd go there, and I'm not a huge fan of Mexican food, but I would get this one thing that just wasn't very heavy, and it was good. I'm fine. And then the next day was mine, which was Indian food. And this place that I freaking love. And even that, this was primarily healthy, except for the dessert. That was my one treat, which was the ras malai. And I got that, once a week. But then once the pandemic hit, we haven't even left the house since April. But once that happened, then it was, well, now what do we do? Well, Oreos to the rescue. So there you go. Hi, Eleanor. Anyway, so there's that.
So yeah. So we're both out of shape. So that was the point of that.
Well, I'm getting better.
You're working on it, and I should. I cut out. Well, one problem is that I used to be okay because I was almost addicted to Jelly Bellies, and they didn't have them in Thailand, and now they do, and they're like crack because they're $1 for like a thing like this small, where I could bring like the whole giant jar. So I would start getting those, but then I stopped, and it's like once I stop eating sugar, I don't miss it, but as soon as I start, it's
totally, absolutely. It's like it takes a little while to break the habit, and then once I do, I've never been a huge chocolate person anyway. I mean, it's okay, but I like dark chocolate better. But I've never really been a huge chocolate person anyway. But if I get on a roll, I'll pretty much consume sugar out of a bag. I mean, so I don't do it. Yeah. And I disagree about us. I think we're in A shape.
Yeah. Underneath this, there's really a lot of muscle. I mean, I would do the leg sled, 1,000 pounds, one leg. Yeah. It's just getting rid of the unattractive parts. I'm in Thailand, and I can't afford the plastic surgery to suck out what it would take to make me look fuckable. Is what it is.
Hi, Kathleen. Yeah, like I told earlier, I said, look, I can work out like crazy. I have that, frame where I can go like that. You look like you have it too. Everything else, I said, there's not much I can do from here up.
Yeah,
but from here down, I can do pretty good.
Here, I was just like my arms and everything were just really ripped and everything else. And it's like, why the fuck is this still here? Is this where the fat wants to stay? Yeah,
exactly.
So it's like, don't take pictures of everything except for my face because all the rest of it's looking good.
Exactly.
Yes, even there.
Exactly, Alicia. I agree. That's kind of the thing. And I think we have lived on carbs, coffee, and sugar over the last year. Laura Lee learned how to make donuts recently. That was fun.
That's great. Yeah, I've started drinking coffee because I can't, like, the weekends is pretty much when I do the diet soda. I don't let myself have it during the week. So I try to do coffee instead. Right. Not that it's much better, but some caffeine, even though it doesn't help very much, it does more than nothing.
No, actually, coffee's been proven to do,
for keeping me awake.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah. Because it's just caffeine, so you'd have to dump tons of sugar, and then you may as well have soda. Well, at least you get some benefits from the caffeine. I mean, from the coffee, though. Let's see. I'm making my own soda. Oh, there you go. So Heather's making her own soda. You should do that.
I made my own root beer one time. I used way too much yeast, and I ended up like having like I'm trying to think, the cartoons where they'll like balloon out, or like in Willy Wonka where it got out like that. That's like how bloated I got.
Yeah.
I was burping and going out the other end for like a week because
Now,
I guess the yeast. I don't know.
When you lived here, did you have High's grocery store?
Not in my area, no.
Okay, so you probably we just see Facebook user as far here. I'm going to show you this way. You know who you are. Damn it, my mouse. It just says Facebook user. Good afternoon, morning, evening. So we don't know who you are. So you have to approve StreamYard to do that. If you go to StreamYard.com/Facebook, you can do that, and then it will pick up your name and everything else. I'll type it in here. So StreamYard.com/Facebook. Anyway, so there was a at Highs. Yeah, well, it's because it's going to different channels. At Highs, there. Well, you know what 7-Eleven has the slushy, right? Or
right.
Slurpee.
Yeah, they
Slurpee,
even
right?
got those here.
Yeah, so they had the Slurpee. But at Highs, they had a slushy, which is different. Slushy is ice. It's not like it's not like a whip, which
right.
Yeah, it's like really, icy. It's almost like a snow cone, except for it's also got liquid. You know what I mean? Anyway, so they used to have this blue raspberry one when I was a kid, and oh my God, that was good. And then one day I was like, man, there's got to be more sugar than this. And the person said, well, I mean, we can do 2 pumps. I was like, cool, 2 pumps. So they did 2 pumps. Oh, that made it even better. So one day I said, give it 5 pumps. And the guy was like, you're not going to like that. And I was like, no, it'll be great. It'll be great. It's your dollar, or it was your 20 cents. I'm old, right? And so I paid for that. I go outside. I'm all excited. I went, oh. That was awful. That was pure shit. I mean, I was like, ooh, dump that out. But it stopped me from drinking those things for like 3 months. So, yeah, you can overdo it. Anyway, let's move on. So you wanted to talk a little bit, or you had the idea of what are you watching? What are you reading?
Because we consume media because, that's how if you take things from your life, from what you're doing, all these other stuff, and we're humans, so we tend to have this shit in front of us.
Wait, what?
Well, we're mostly human. There's some rat DNA in there somewhere, but I don't listen to music very often when I'm writing. Sometimes I will, but like this last week, I actually, just to get through the fun of work and everything, I had like one of my hard rock and so I don't know, just a mix of shit in there as my background music, and it kind of helped. So some of these, I don't know if people will know them or not, just because they're real weird. But I was listening to a lot of Sisters of Mercy, which is kind of just to get me. This is like goth rock, and then Pain, which is like kind of, I don't know, it's like somewhere around Finland or something like that, but he kind of sounds like Ozzy.
Okay.
And maybe I'll drop a link to the songs that I was listening to.
Cool.
And I read on suggestion to someone, if you're the reader who told me about this, let me know, because it was pretty good. The 24/7 Demon Mart series. It's only got 2 books and 2 smaller books, but as far as us showing off what other people are doing, that was a pretty funny and fun series.
Yep.
So
cool.
That's
Sharon, yes, it's working now. Thank you for doing that. I don't know why it did that. Sometimes I think StreamYard messaged me this morning, actually, when I started this up. Sorry to interrupt. And just to say that. Hey, you're about 5 days away from losing the access to all of your channels for the StreamYard thing. Do you want us to reconnect it? So I did. So maybe your year is up and they redid that to you. I don't know. But anybody else, your year might be coming up soon. Hi, Paulette. Yeah. So I actually, I want that link too, because that sounds interesting. I want to see, I want to hear some of that music as well. You know me, I'm a metal guy, so Ozzy's fun. As for me, I was already telling you about this. I have this. There's this one tune. I'm gonna do the obligatory guitar pull here. So this is a 7-string guitar, which means it's got 7 strings. So it's got this deeper note, whereas my other guitar, that's the lowest note that you're going to get. And there's a band called Nocturnal Rites, and the song is called Still Alive. The recording is terrible, but I freaking love that song. Anyway, I never could play it before because I didn't have 7 strings. So now I can. And the song, just so you know, just the beginning of it. That's it. But it just sounds so freaking cool. And man, the solo in that song is just insanity. I've been trying to play that for a long time. And
so if you can find a YouTube performance or something of that, you should drop that in there too, so we can check it out.
Yeah, definitely. And again, the recording, it's unfortunate. The recording is so lame, but it's muddy as hell. But boy, what a great tune. Again, we have someone, sorry I got in late. We just see you as Facebook users. So go to StreamYard.com/Facebook and hook yourself up, because we don't know who you are. So there you go. But yeah, I will. I'll send a link. I'll put a link in the messages for this, and so you guys can check it out. But man, just love that tune. Other than that, the movies I've been watching. We just finished watching The Queen's Gambit, which was actually pretty good. I mean, it was a little bit weird at times, but wasn't bad. I mean, you totally know what's going to happen, but it's a series. Was pretty cool. And we also started watching The History of Swear Words with Nicolas Cage, and he doesn't disappoint. Absolutely awful. But it is funny. So we had fun with that. And as far as what I've been reading, I've been going back and reading old stuff. I read the Book of the Malazan, the first one, Gardens of the Moon. Steven Erikson. I finished that about 2 weeks ago. Prior to that, I had been reading Guards, Terry Pratchett, and so then what I do is I look at like Erikson stuff is really mentally just I mean, it's so heavy that then I do like comedy stuff in between, even though Terry Pratchett stuff can be heavy as well. If you actually look at the satire instead of just the humor, But I tend to, I've already done that with the satire of his stuff, so I can now read it more lightly than I used to.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about, because I've started the first book in that like 3 times, and it's just like trying to swim through syrup. It's just like, I know it's I like it, but it's like I can't focus that much right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I get it. There's a lot of characters. There's a lot of different angles. There's a lot of things. You're talking about Steven Erikson, and it's such a deeply threaded world that it's insane, and it is hard to read. I have to say, but at the same time, man, some of the stuff that guy says is just so deep and philosophical, and it's impressive. But right now, I just literally finished last night Men at Arms. So I'm going to be diving into the next, I think Dead House Gates is what it's called, for Steven Erikson to go next. And then I will jump to, probably a David Gemmell or something like that, some other type of book. I don't know. I like all that kind of stuff, because what it does is it doesn't really, it entertains me and it occupies my mind, but it doesn't make me study their work. And if I read contemporary authors, I do. And that takes away the fun for me. So I don't know why. It's just been so long since I've read all these other books that they're more nostalgic than they are study.
Did you ever read any Gene Wolfe?
No.
Yeah, his stuff, like, everyone says he's a master, all these layers to all this other stuff. I read it and I was like, yeah, that's okay. But then, like, I kept thinking about what the hell is that? Because, like, he leaves out so much, and supposedly you're supposed to, like, read it 3-4 times, whatever. And I'm like, I don't have time for that.
Yeah, I don't want to read it 3 or 4 times.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Heather just said, I refer to that kind of book as reading all Tolkien's work as one. It's true. And I mean, I would say, I mean, you know, having read, you know, Lord of the Rings as well, trilogy, you know, I mean, they're easier to read than the Silmarillion, obviously. But at the same time, I just couldn't get into it at all, especially at the end of the last book. It just got so stupid. I just couldn't do it. But hold up. Yes, you have, Michelle. You're all set. So hi, Michelle. Yeah, I just couldn't do it. It was too much at the end of that book. I just, oh my God. Now my kid, you know, had read the Silmarillion and can actually write in Elvish, which is hugely nerdy.
Hobby.
There's a hobby for you. So huge nerd to be able to do that kind of thing. But that's actually good stuff to kind of bring us into our discussion for today. However, before we do that, we have to take care of some business. So let's go ahead and first talk about headlines. You go first. You got anything?
If people are on John's group, which I assume you are, you saw that Tokyo Kaiju will be coming out. I'm getting so close I can almost taste it. It's just, which when you're talking about a Burt book might not be a good thing. But yeah, it's taken a few tweaks, added a little extra, but I just got to wrap it up. And don't get me wrong, I'm enjoying it. I just want to enjoy it from having it finished perspective.
Right. Yeah. So from my perspective, well, I wasn't going to release the first book from the 2021 vaccine zombies series, but the reader team read through it pretty quickly, which made that, you know, and they liked it, which was a huge key. And I'm already 37,000 words, I think, into the second book. Each one of the books is about 50,000 words. So I've got, you know, I'll have that one done by the end of next week. And at that point, you know, Team Mass has already read the first half, so they'll be reading the second half, and then I'll, you know, address any issues that they found. Then that'll turn over to Team Dam, and by the time that happens, I'll probably already be 10,000 words into the third book. Goal is to finish all three of them by the end of the month, and ship that out. Wild Claws, the final book. Oh, so on the 15th, so next Friday, the first book releases. If you know, want to grab the pre-order, you know, it's well, it's on the John P. Loxton group. And then Wild Claws is releasing on the 29th, which is the final book of the New York Paranormal Police Department with Bethany Black, and that's, you know, with Ben. And we'll also have Ben on the 30th on the show here to discuss, you know, that with him, and also what's he up to next and everything else. So that's going to be closing out the New York one, obviously, what you just said. So I'm looking forward to getting the second half of that, so I can do developmental editing there. We can work together, get that over to Team Mass as well, and then get a Team Dam started so we can get that scheduled and launched. The goal for 2021 Vaccine Zombies is to have all three books out by March. So I kind of want to, you know, get that going, get those out there and so on. And that brings me to a little other thing. My audio producer guy contacted me today. I'm looking over here because that's my notes. Audio producer guy contacted me today to tell me about a new kind of vocal booth, which is portable. And there are a lot of portable vocal booths, but most of them are meh. And I need something that's not meh. And as you guys know, I have the vocal booth behind me that's, or in front of me, actually, sorry, that is massive. I mean, it weighs, God, probably about 400 pounds. The thing is huge and all that. And it's great. The problem is getting in there, and it's hot, and it's, you know, it's got all this. I've talked about this before, but this new style of vocal booth, what it does, first off, it's collapsible, which is, it doesn't weigh that much. It's got the aluminum outsides and everything else. So it's probably around 40 pounds, you know, so it's not that bad. It's large, but it also has 5 legs, and you can actually telescope the legs. So you can have 2 legs on the floor right here, and then, legs on the desk and one behind it, which means I could wrap this entire thing where I'm seated with the vocal booth, and it's open in the back. So all of the sound is forward facing and all that. And it does have a top on it, and everything else. So I could wrap everything here, which means that if I wanted to do narration, I just take 5 minutes to set the thing up, boom, like that, and then open up a book and just start reading, as opposed to the procedure of everything you have to do to get all that stuff set, ready to go. I know you would think, well, isn't it kind of the same procedure? It's really not. And by the time you're in there, if I'm sitting in here, I'm not going to start getting boiling hot. So I can read for a while, and then I can actually sit there and move that out of the way and just start doing some work, typing, whatever, and say, okay, I'm going to do another chapter, and bring everything right back, and boom, I'm doing a chapter. So it's not a commitment. It's kind of like you were talking about the gym. If you have a treadmill in your house, you go turn the treadmill on, walk for a mile. If you have a gym, you got to go get in your car, drive down the road, do the whole thing. You're not likely to do that, but you're more likely to get on the treadmill. No, you're not. But anyway, you get the idea. So I'm looking into that. They're not shipping that thing until February. The other good thing about that would be this room is cramped as balls. So I would be able to get rid of that massive thing. I could reconfigure my room completely, which means that I can get back to doing videos for music videos and stuff like that. Because right now, where would I put the camera? So that could be kind of cool. And I could just, change the entire structure of my office to be, I don't know, more officey, more work better for me. So yeah, I'm kind of excited about the concept of that and such. Plus, it's not that expensive, and it's a business expense because I can write off for doing audiobooks. And that brings me to audiobooks. So the news there being, look, we all know what's going on with Audiblegate and everything else. So I've been thinking about it. And even if I were to do audiobooks, my thought, if I can get this, thing set up, my thought there is, well, okay, so do audiobooks, but sell them on your own site using BookFunnel. Don't sell them on Audible. And are you going to make as much money? Probably not. But you're also not going to be, screwed by Audible. I don't know how else to put it. They're stealing 50% of the income from everybody. So once they get their stuff, set and squared away, okay, then, you can consider doing it again. Otherwise, sell it yourself. So it's something I'm thinking about. And BookFunnel, as we use for delivering our, books right now, they have a new system where they allow just that. And it's been getting great reviews from a lot of authors I've spoken with. So I'm thinking maybe give it a shot, see what happens.
Yeah, I saw that was out, but since I didn't really have any audiobooks or anything, I hadn't really dug into it very much. But that's just cool that they're filling a need anyway.
Yeah, it's a huge need. And, hopefully that pans out. And it also apparently has an app and everything that, so it's pro stuff. And I know the guy who created BookFunnel. I was his very first customer, actually. And, great guy, very smart and ethical dude. And so, I don't fear, I've been using BookFunnel for years now. I don't fear that, he's going to do anything that, like Audible does, especially because I think he's just going to be charging a monthly for the service. And so if you want to put, I think it's like you can put up to 20 books or whatever for this much per month. Other than that, you connect it to PayPal or Stripe or whatever, and then you have your own purchase pages. A person buys it, it connects to his, the BookFunnel thing, which then connects it to your app and authorizes, I don't know, all the voodoo that goes with that. But so the point is he's not taking a cut per book. He's just saying, pay $20 a month or $10 a month or whatever it is, and you can have this many books on the service. So if you sell 100, he doesn't care. He's got his 10 books. If you sell 1,000, he doesn't care. If you sell 10,000, he doesn't care. You'll care because that'd be awesome, but he won't. So yeah, I think that's about it as far as news is concerned. Anything else from you?
No, don't think
No?
so.
Well, then I think that falls us into right. What do we got today?
Yeah, since I've been writing a lot of Bert, he's getting beefed up a little bit as I'm going through, so keep that in mind when I read this joke.
Here we go.
How do you embarrass an archaeologist?
I don't know. Noah, how do you embarrass an archaeologist?
Give him a used tampon and ask him which period it came from.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And on that note, well, it was great running this show for the 15 episodes we had. You know what I should do? I know that we didn't talk about. I mean, we're past the headlines, but I'll bring this up anyway. We actually have some guests coming up for the show, which are pretty big names. So let me share some of these. We have next week, we're going to be talking to Martha Carr. So she's joining us on the 30th, Ben Zackheim. On February 13th, we have Hunter Blaine. On February 20th, we have Bruce Kingsolver, also known as BR Kingsolver. On February 26th, we have John Hartness. So February is going to be like boom, boom, boom. So there'll be 3 weeks straight with talking to folks. On March 13th, we'll be talking to Kimber Swain. And on April 3rd, we have Claire Taylor. That's as far out as I have gone. So not going any further than that. But interesting lineup that we've got coming. So, yeah.
I think more than half of that were in the anthology, the quick draw one. So that's pretty cool. A couple of them I'll have to read books by, like I don't know who that Bing guy is, but maybe he's all right.
Bing?
Ben, Bing,
Ben.
I don't know.
Oh,
yeah, whoever that guy is.
Zorkheim, I think. That's it.
Yeah.
I'll
have to check it out.
Yeah, me being a child, I have called him Sack Slime, of course. He said, "Oh yeah, whatever, long dong." I'm like, "Oh no, I hate that
That's
nickname."
a horrible one. Yeah. Yeah, considering
So, don't call me long dong. That would be horrible. Yeah.
Considering Turd Van is right in my last name, I didn't do much better. So
yeah, well, that's why I called you Turd Savant. So
yeah, Turd Savant. So
yeah,
that means I know my shit.
That's right. You do. You absolutely know your shit. All right, let's get to it. We are now going to start discussing the writing bootcamp. Righto. So any questions that you guys might have regarding world building, feel free to start posting them now, or as they come up as we speak, make sure to go ahead and ask them. So let's get to it. The concept of world building as an author. Now, the first thing that most people are probably going to think is, oh, well, if it's sci-fi, it's this. If it's fantasy, it's this. If it's urban fantasy, romance, whatever. And Noah and I kind of discussed this briefly before we started the show. But and it is true. I mean, there are differences for each one, but there's also similarities between each one. So the obvious thought that most people have probably when they're thinking about world building is, well, what is the cities, what do the cities look like? And like you immediately start kind of going to fantasy, do I have to draw a map? Do I have to have this or, whatever?
Obviously you start with writing a brand new language that John's daughter will then learn.
Exactly. You go through that process and everything else, because world building really does seem to stem from that kind of thing. But world building isn't necessarily that involved. Now, when we get to start talking about fantasy, yeah. But and even that, though, you don't have to go that far to get into fantasy and such. I actually believe I have a few maps that I've done. Yeah, one of them's right there behind me. But anyway, but the first thing you really want to think about in world building is basically, where are you? I mean, simple as that. Where are you? So if we took Southeast Asia, that's all over the place. Yeah. So, that's a different kind of a quote world building event. You could say, oh, but it's in Earth, right? Well, except for we added the Netherworld. We added Badlands. We added the 6th level. No, carry the one. We added the many levels of hell. 9, I think.
I don't. Yeah, lots count. But yeah, there's pros and cons to jumping from different cities each time, or just having the one place. People do it different.
Exactly. And so here's the other thing. So we're just talking about just basic location at this point. So you have like Vegas, right? That was the E-index thing. Why did I choose Vegas? What was the purpose of that? I like Vegas, which is really weird because the first time I went there, I really didn't like Vegas. But the second time I went, I was a little bit more laid back about it, and I kind of liked it. And it was also pretty easy to write in because it's iconic. There's a lot of everybody knows, everybody can see the cowboy, in the old Vegas Strip. You have that view, all of the different things, Bally's and Bellagio with the water, going up, and you're just familiar with it, and you're familiar with the concept of casinos and gambling and stuff like that. So since I was brand new to, writing urban fantasy, and I had the feeling that Raleigh, North Carolina really wasn't that, inspiring or anything for me to write about. It was either New York, Los Angeles, or Vegas, frankly, because I wasn't going to do something like London because honestly, it would be too much research and too much work. And I'm not from there. I'm not familiar at all. But I was able to at least base the concept, for where are these people working? There was another really good reason. It's very flat there, except for it's kind of surrounded by mountains, but it's very flat, which means I didn't have to, I could go look at the Google map and I could basically very easily kind of look where everything was. It's kind of a grid layout for the streets. So it became easy. I didn't have to worry about all these twists and turns to get into various locations and so on. I know that's like, what difference does that make? Because I was new to urban fantasy, and I, had gotten from what I had read that a lot of it is exploratory of the area that you're in. I wanted to make sure that A, I was familiar, even though I didn't know the depths of it, I was at least familiar. B, most of the, what happens there is similar to anywhere because it's kind of a hodgepodge of people from all over the place. And I have lived in a lot of places. So, I was familiar with that. It is iconic. It had places where, when they wanted to go in and fight, it was in this massive casino of something like that, or it was outside at the water feature or whatever, but stuff that you've seen in Ocean's 11 or other, movies, tons of movies made with Vegas in mind and so on. So it was familiar to me. And that's why I wanted to do that. And I'm assuming that's similar to what you did with the Asia component.
Yeah, because I've been to all of those places. I mean, whenever we outlined it all, I hadn't been to Japan yet, but I wanted to get there before I wrote it. Luckily, I was able to. But then, yeah, he starts in Kansas City because that's where I started. And now someone's written a book called Kansas City Warlock. So I guess that name's taken now. But yeah, Bangkok, I've been here 8 years or 7.5, something like that. Mm-hmm. And so I know the city pretty well, without knowing the language. And like we talked to, I think it was when Nasru was on, the other ones, I was there long enough to know what a tourist would see and, all that kind of stuff.
And I think that was a huge benefit because one of the things that can come from that, if you are, especially if you're an expat, so, like Rami Vance, for example, he lives in Scotland now, right? And so it's a great way, if he did like a Scottish type thing, he could have, his character has moved to Scotland and is having to deal with that, kind of like what you did. Right, your character moved just like you did into that area, and now you're exploring the world from their perspective, and you're learning it. And over the course of your books, you've become very used to it. But in those first books, there was a lot of things that you were seeing, and as through Mark's eyes, and as you're seeing these things through Mark's eyes as the reader, you're going, "Wow, that's crazy! I didn't know about that," and all that. So it's almost like a travelogue of what you're doing,
Yeah, like when Bert is picking up like eating squid and whatever durian, all the weird foods that they have in Bangkok that people hadn't even heard of. I mean, yeah, I completely, unless it's something in hell, I mean, like all that stuff is completely real.
Yes.
So, and it's kind of the experiences I had. I tried to look at it as, okay, so if I had never been here before and I went through and walked through the one shopping center that they visit, and I said, okay, what's weird here? And just wrote, a couple things, and those got into the book.
Yeah, because I mean, a shopping center is kind of a shopping center. We all are familiar with that, and so on. That's the other thing to keep in mind. I don't care what you've read. Chances are there's something in there that is at least familiar to you, whether it's a place to eat or a shop or a shopping center or a car or some type of vehicle or a road, whatever. It's familiar to you. You don't want to write something so abstract that people can't follow.
And most places are international enough that there's not really a problem. I mean, because you can get deep fried baby squid right next to the Cinnabon.
You paused a little long between saying baby and squid.
Yeah, deep fried baby. Yeah,
squid.
Well, I was trying to think of it's octopus or squid, whichever. I think they've got both, but maybe this is octopus.
That's gross.
But it's right across from the Cinnabon, so you can imagine the odors mixing between that.
Yeah.
And people are like, oh, after I finish eating the squid, let's get a Cinnabon. I'm like, let's get a Cinnabon and never come back here.
Let's just do the Cinnabon part. What do you say? But what I meant by that was, the abstract of, they lived in this ethereal place where nothing was the same as here. It's really hard because people need some level of grounding. Again, we're talking locale here. I mean, that's pretty much it. So let's take the, the next step, the netherworld. So what was the purpose of the netherworld? When I had designed that, the idea was that I wanted to have a place where these people were from. That they weren't just supernaturals who just bing showed up. They were kind of like a thin veil separation between the upper world and the netherworld, or topside and the netherworld. And so that meant to me that they had to have some place to live. They had to have some type of a city and everything else. And then I wanted to have this separation, this wall between like the people who we consider normal supernaturals and kind of a fantasy world almost, where it's the dragons and the orcs and the hellions, and then the levels of hell with all the stuff that goes involved into that. They're still supernatural, yes, but they do kind of jump into the side of almost D&D. I don't, or Lord of the Rings or whatever, fantasy. They jump on the side of fantasy more than urban fantasy. Why? For me, again, with the concept of world building, it was a case of I needed to keep it interesting to me. And this is a big lesson. Just because, you're writing in a particular thing and you're going, well, these are all the standard tropes. It depends on what your goal is. But the bottom line is, if you can't keep something interesting to you as the author, it's going to be really hard for you to write. So you need to have moments of inspiration, everything else. Doesn't mean you even have to dig in deep into the Badlands. And frankly, I wasn't really ever going to do that. But it still needed to have some component, which is why I brought Ian down there in the third book. And that's really what allowed me to explore some of the Badlands and just kind of give hints, but not go too deep. But then after that, I found that people really enjoyed that, which is when, we started talking about, well, then we can bring the demon back into hell. We can have all those conversations. That's where the Badlands came up with when I talked to Orlando. That's when Sinister, the Hellion side of it, that's when that became its own little ecosystem over there. And that's what allowed us to explore that side of the world. But as you'll notice, we didn't really get too crazy. And actually, with the Badlands, everything topside was based on the netherworld because the supernaturals were the one who built topside, really. And so Vegas is really based on the Badlands, the strip in the Badlands. So it's kind of like, you would think it's the other way around, but it's not. Vegas comes from supernaturals who came up from the Badlands and built Vegas. But what that did was that made it interesting to me as an author. And if you don't have that level of interest for yourself in your own world that you're working in, you're going to find yourself struggling.
Yeah, which is probably why I move around a lot, because I forget which book it is that group actually goes to the Badlands for a little while. And then I was talking to Orlando. He's like, what do I need to know? It's like, I didn't do anything that you can break. It's pretty much clean slate, do whatever you need. Mm-hmm. But it was fun to go somewhere that hadn't been explored. And then now I spend so much time in the level of hell because that one is more fun for me than real places.
There you go. Yeah, and again, that's pretty important. So looking at, again, we're going to stick with locale just for a few moments here, and we're going to touch very briefly on things like science fiction and fantasy and so on. Most things that are contemporary, which urban fantasy is considered, usually considered contemporary. Yes, you can do other stuff with it where it's just like, well, this is urban fantasy of 1812, which is kind of historical urban fantasy, right? You can do that. But again, most of these things, romance, urban fantasy, things like that, even adventure books, are usually set in today, in the world as we know it. They might have a historical component, like historical romance, whatever, like I said before, or they might be in the future a little bit, which can bring in a sci-fi element to it if you want. But a lot of times folks will leave it in the world. And I have to say, when I started, the PPD, it was easy to be able to do that because it was familiar. I didn't have to create something new. I didn't have to try to, design everything else. It was also less fun, which is why Netherworld and Badlands came up in my thinking. But if you start moving into science fiction and fantasy, it becomes a little more involved. Sci-fi, I have found, really comes down to, most people think of sci-fi in ships, spaceships flying through and stuff like Star Trek. Let's just take that. So the majority of Star Trek takes place on the USS Enterprise, which means that your city is a ship. And if you go to Platoon F, your city is the SSMC Reluctant. They travel to other planets. They deal with other people on other planets, which is where you have, what you just did with Southeast Asia being the different locales that you've traveled to and so on. But they are all still familiar. It's the ship that, is the big difference. It's the closed-in environment, and what does the bridge look like, and what are the connections? Where is everybody sleep? What's the mess? Where's the, the engineering section? All of these different things. It's what, as an author, is in your head and what you're trying to convey across to the reader. The good news, again, is it's all based on familiarity. It's not like you're trying to start something fresh. Even if you were the first, if you were Star Trek, and so on, and you were trying to think, well, how does this look? It's based pretty much on a ship of the Navy, or a mixture of like an office mixed with that. Mixed with like digital equipment and all this kind of stuff, and having multiple levels. But it's a naval vessel. Most of what you read in space is Space Navy, is pretty much what it is. So you have, again, you just tap into the familiarity of that particular thing. Any questions on that or notes?
Well, I think you've kind of addressed what Audrey asked about the pro cons of using a real world and one that's made up. And that's kind of it's going to be a common thread throughout the whole thing.
Yeah. And so we can talk about that in a second. I want to hide that just for now, though. So again, yeah, you can have it on a totally alien world, Avatar, right? You can do that. You can have it where the ship is really just a transport medium to get you to different, alien places where you can check out things, or space stations or whatever. Absolutely, you can do that. And so then what you're really doing, though, when you get to those locations, it's still a planet. And we're all familiar with the planet. Like, now it might be different. Instead of it being, greens and blues, maybe it's browns and purples, that can happen, or whatever. Do you have to wear a breathing apparatus when you're on the planet? Blah, blah, blah. What do the aliens look like? How do they interact? But they're still, if they're, if they're sentient and walking around talking to each other, they're still going to need places to eat. They're still going to need places to sleep. They're still going to need, so again, back to familiarity with those types of things. Maybe they do it totally different and you want to come up with interesting ways to show that. That's cool, but you still need to eat. You still need to sleep. You still, you have to do all of those things. So, the first thought is, oh my God, it's so much to think about. And it's so crazy. It really doesn't have to be that bad. They might call their sleeping quarters something different than you do, and that's okay. But then you have the universal translator, which allows you to understand what they're saying. And so when they say, that means bedroom. Okay, great. And so on. Then we move to fantasy. Fantasy, that's a fun one. Because fantasy usually means it's a different world. And yes, they still have the places to sleep and all that kind of stuff. But usually you're living in that world for a while. So it's not like I'm going to this alien place in my spaceship. I do whatever the mission requires, but I don't really have to learn everything about the city. I just gotta, track down the bad guy or whatever, take care of the situation, then get back in my ship and get the hell out of there. But when you're living in a fantasy world, you're Frodo now. So you have the Shire. You have everything that happens in the Shire. You have, what are those people like? Because you're living as that character there. What are they like? How do they interact? What do they eat? What is their, like, for example, like you said, the strange things that you saw eating people eating in Thailand are not normal to see in Raleigh, right? So what is it? What is their culture? Do they smoke the funny weed there a lot? Is it something that they don't? Is there a religion thing that they have there? Do they have particular political situations that they have that, aren't seen in other places or whatever? And then when that person leaves the Shire, which was one of the nice things about Lord of the Rings, when they walked out of that, they started going across and visiting other communities, basically, that they weren't familiar with. And so now, when they walk into this other area, sure, they still had food and drink. They still had all of the things that went with that. But there was also this big, in order to get to that bar that they need to meet, the tavern that they needed to meet the people at, they also had to go through this massive gate that was opened up by somebody who challenged them, and then they let them in. It's like they weren't used to that. They lived in the Shire where it was wide open and beautiful green fields and rolling hills and all that kind of stuff. But now all of a sudden they're in this dark and dismal city situation where the humans live, right? And that's the other thing, a different culture that they have to deal with. So what are your cultures? Do you have elves? Now again, you have familiarity here unless you're creating new stuff. Because if you're basing it on fantasy, most fantasy consists of things like hobbits and goblins and orcs and ogres and elves and, that kind of a thing. So you have the familiarity of, people are already kind of familiar with that. If they're going to jump in and start reading fantasy, they probably know what those things are.
Yeah. And as a writer, if you're making up every new species and stuff, you're going to end up with trouble, probably. It's going to be a big challenge. That's one where you might have an advantage at sci-fi, because it seems like you can do the same things with each genre, but because you're going and learning new cultures, one's in a planet, one's another country with a different race or whatever. But people aren't as accustomed to it in fantasy. You might have one or two that you add because that's what makes yours different. But if you have a fantasy with no elves, no dwarves, none of that stuff, you're gonna need to explain why.
Yeah, but people are going to go, this isn't realistic.
Yeah.
It's like,
you can do it like Stephen Brust's Jerrig series. Like most of that there's only like 2 or 3 races, and there's humans, and then there's other ones, and they aren't the typical ones. So, and he can pull it off, but yeah, you're going to have to put a lot more work into it because people are going to say, where the fuck are my elves?
Yep. Yeah, no, it's absolutely right. I want to grab these 2 things for a second. So I'm going to remove myself from this so I can grab them. Go ahead and speak amongst yourselves.
Yeah.
I'll be right back.
So, how was your day? Do anything fun? Oh, yeah. I'm not going to tell anybody, but you should probably turn yourself in. No, I won't tell anybody. Don't come to my house. No, please don't. Okay. Yeah, that's me not knowing what to say. So what's the movie where they do that? It was someone, maybe John would know.
What's that?
The movie, I was pretending that someone was confessing shit to me here, and I'm trying to remember which parody movie it was. Maybe it was Amazon Women on the Moon. At the end, it has Andrew Dice Clay and someone else where like he puts in a video and then it ends up like at the end where the guy gets arrested.
Nope.
If not, I'll have to go back and look at it. It was one of those spoof type movies that's kind of like a Robot Chicken one where it's just scene after scene after scene.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter.
Okay, so the very first map I ever made for fantasy was for Ononikin. This is old, everything else, so I don't know if you can see that. But what you can see, actually, is this? Yeah, this Ononikin. So what you have is the upper world up here. Then I wanted to have portals to allow them to jump back and forth, and then I wanted to have the ability to have the underworld, the underworld in this one. And so what I did was I basically, just drew a shape and just started going around with it. And I started adding things into this, and I started naming the different locations, which is, of course, the old story about how did Ononikin happen when Chris said, well, what's the name of the total world? And I said, oh, no, not again. He thought I said Ononikin. Ha, ha, ha. Anyhow, so there was that. And so I actually drew those things out, and I started thinking, okay, well, how do they connect together? Why do they connect together? And name them. And then after you name them, I was going, well, who lives in each one of these things? So, for example, when I looked at this, I was just like, well, who lives in Vic? Vampires. Okay, who lives in Vac? Vampires. What's the difference? Well, the ones in Vic don't like the ones in Vac, and the ones in Vac don't like the ones in Vic. So I was like, okay, that's funny. So I enjoyed that. What about Dackmanhem? I was like, well, that's like, Amsterdam. It was the general idea there because, Dackmanhem, Amsterdam, it kind of had that thing. So I did that. And then, started Hubentagler. To me, that sounds like gnomes, because it's just a weird name and it's goofy. So I just kept on doing this kind of thing across the board. And I ended up going, this is where all the different people live. The concept of hobbits in the Shire, and so on. And so then, from there, I started writing up little descriptions of here are the people who live here. This is their general thing. And those descriptions started growing over the course of time, mostly in my head, and so on. But it allowed me to start really going, well, crap, I could do anything here, because now I can write these stories as a day in the life, which was good and bad. It was good because it allowed me to have the creative freedom to just really have fun. So I could jump to, the story of Gappy from Hubentagler moving to Planuntic. I could jump from that to Polly and Vic, who had to take, Mr. Biscuits to Yazan. I could do all of those types of things in locations of where they lived. It was a day in the life. Where it actually hindered or hurt the series was that I did it in such a way where I wasn't really thinking at the time. I mean, you got to remember, this was a very long time ago. I wasn't thinking in terms of sales. So it's something to think about. When you split off into a day in the life thing, people get invested in characters, not necessarily in location. And I didn't know that back then, right? Because I just didn't think that way. So now, of course, you can go look at, that's why I redid the covers. You can go now look at and see the Wizfiddle and Gungren adventures. It's the first 4 books. It's all them. Prior to that, it was book 1 with them. And it wasn't until book 5 that we came back to them. And it was disjointed. It just didn't make much sense. So now it has that connection all the way through. But now I have other Tales of Ononikin, which are the individual books. And they could become their own series, depending on how things go, of course. But it's like, think in terms of that as well. Not just, these are fun little areas I want to write in, but rather, yes, they are great little areas I want to write in. And I may never write in any, these 7 may never happen, but you still need to know about them, because it impacts your world if somebody from one of those areas comes into the area you're in. And if they do, how are they going to act differently based upon their culture versus the culture that they've just walked into? If everybody walks into your culture, oh, you're from such and such. Yes. Well, then, but I act just like you do here. No difference at all. Not likely. There's probably going to be some differences. Even if they're minor, there's going to be something that sets this person apart. For example, Eloquin, he speaks in his flowery language and everything else, but he can speak common. It's like, ugh, when he does so.
So he's like French, basically.
Yeah, exactly. But then you also had the gods and the fates and everything else. And originally it was just the gods. And I was just like, we're not really doing anything with the gods. I was talking to Chris about it. I said, we're not really doing anything with the gods. And I said, wouldn't it be funnier if the gods had gods? And he goes, ooh, I like that. And I was like, yeah, we'll make it the fates. And then the joke was the fates are actually in charge of all of our books. So the fates are in charge of, the intergalactic, I think they call it the Church of Automation now is what we call it. So they're in charge of that world too. They're in charge of this other world and so on. We kind of like curtailed it a bit, but it was kind of fun to do that. But yeah, writing these things out is important. Now, the second map that I did, you guys don't know about this book unless you're on Team Mass. This is called Phyllian. And this was basically a much different world that I had created. And it's more of a serious fantasy thing that, I'm probably never going to finish. But it was the thing that I did for the Wielder the Blade album that I wrote, and so on. So that's how I got that story out. Finally, it's a cool story and everything else. And there's a hell of a lot that's going on in this map where, it was very Lord of the Rings inspired. Let's put it that way. And how it was done. Totally different idea, totally different story, but inspired completely by that. Ononican was not inspired by that. Ononican was inspired by myth adventures mixed with Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and many TV shows, Monty Python, stuff like that. It was inspired by that stuff. Not Discworld, although if I had read it, yeah, it would have been inspired by that, but honestly it wasn't. So yeah, you have to create those maps and everything else. Again, though, we're just talking about locale here. We haven't gotten into the other aspects of world building.
But it's interesting when you bring up the myth adventures because I can see parallels in Southeast Asia because the bazaar is kind of like the hell.
Yeah, Oz.
Is kind of a home base that's different from everywhere else that they go. So yeah. I mean that's serves the same purpose as the ship does in sci-fi. It's the home base.
Yeah, and the level of hell for that in the PPD is who? The goblins, right? That's the bazaar. Is that because that whole level is them trying to sell you stuff and everything else, and it wasn't intended to be a copy of what they did, but it is a great parallel. It's a good point,
right? But I mean, as far as like Mark and Bert always going back to hell because that's even though that's not where any
Oh, I see.
They're doing stuff.
It's
that's
their home
where they
base.
come back to hang out, heal, all that stuff. Mm-hmm. Then they'll go back and go Bangkok, Seoul, wherever else. But yeah, they ran their business from the bazaar. But then they would go get called out to this other dimension or whatever. But their little mafia group was there.
Right.
I'm trying to remember if there's anything like that from Fool's. I haven't read that in such a long time, and those were fun. The Fool's Company books.
Oh yeah, a lot of that stuff was. It was a little more serious, actually, though it was still humorous.
Right.
But most of it was ship based and going and dealing with like situations and so on.
Yeah, because they had to do a casino heist in one of those. I remember, and
mm-hmm.
trying to remember. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, Robert Asprin, great influence on that. If you guys haven't read Robert Asprin and you like comedy stuff, definitely fun to read the Myth Adventures books and Fool's Company. So I always call them Fuel because it's spelled kind of like that.
Yeah, PH. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that's cool. And also, the Crouton interface by John DeChancy is just ridiculously funny, but it's so out there, but it's also a good one. Actually, if you look at that, you'd probably go, damn, there's Platoon F right there. Again, I'd read that after the fact, but or did I? I think I did actually, but I don't remember. Anyway, regardless. So yeah, we're just talking about locale here, but when you do locale, again, important thing is really know it, especially if you're going into fantasy, sci-fi. You need to know it. You need to know it better than the readers know it, because the readers are going to know you don't if you don't.
Yeah, which was when we did started Kazaron. I had to make a map of where the first book was going to be, not to give out to readers, even though we have it somewhere.
Yeah,
but it's not in the book, I don't think. But I had to be able. I'm not a visual person, so I had to be able to say, no, they're going to go here. So it doesn't make sense for them to take 5 months to get that when it's right next to this.
yes.
So I would physically map things out just to keep it straight in my head.
And that's smart. Yeah. And that's smart to do. There are actually map maker software, programs out there that allow you to do this stuff, visually. So you can draw maps using this type of software where you just drag stuff around, and it'll even do like random coasts and stuff like that for you. And then you can like set buildings on it and type in stuff. You can even get to the degree in some of them where you go inside of a building and you could say, this is where this room is, that room, and so on. And a lot of people love all of that stuff. And it's a good thing to love. Even if your character, such as Kazaron, right? Even if your character is new to this world and has to explore it themselves firsthand, even if that's what's happening, you still need to know. Now, it could be that your character is walking through and they discover something new and they're like, oh, wow, this is, just happened. And it just kind of happened, right? That's okay. Write it down. Make sure that you put it somewhere, because as you're building out this fantasy world or gamelit world or whatever it is, as you're doing that, that thing might come back to bite you. If you, all of a sudden, this character walks through this location, wait a minute, they just walked through a building, a reader might say. Because if they end up knowing your world, if they really love it, they might know your world better than you do if you're not careful. And that's okay if they're like a super fan who can say, hey, dipshit, you just did this. You missed the building that was there that the guy in book 3 discovered on page 94, and you're just going, holy shit. But so you need to make sure you're building that map out so you know what's going on. And you also need to know what those cultures are in those particular areas and how those people interact. Because again, this guy comes in, finally back into, I don't know, let's pick a town here. I don't even know what that one is. Okay. I can't even say some of these. Rathen, we're in Rathen. Let's get pizza. They don't have pizza there. They have that in Rangeview, dipshit. And you're like, oh, so it could be one of those things where you have to know, because your readers will know.
Yep. And for Kazaron, we were doing it a little different because we kind of, each place they go to in each book has a different culture. So it's kind of a cheat there, because we had it to where there's not a whole lot of migration just because of the way things are set up. But then you can think about, like in the Dragon Age games and a lot of RPGs, they'll be like, here's the main town, but here's like goblin section, and that's where the dirty, where the poor people live and all that kind of stuff. So what are the cultures within that town? Are some people oppressed? Or some people richer? I mean, we had that in Cliffs of Eldamar a little bit. The humans were more kind of oppressed, where the elves were the bigger, like controlling stuff. So yeah, there's a lot to keep track of, and I'm actually going to have to reread and take a lot of notes before we get into talking about book 3. Yeah,
exactly. You really do. So let's now can answer this question. What are the pros and cons of using a real world place for one that's totally made up? So the pros of using real world is I can go to Google Maps, especially today. Do this 40 years ago, it's tougher, but I can go to Google Maps today and I can pretty much find out what everything is, where it is, how far is it from the last place that I was at, and so on. If I'm using, real world, it's easier. I can zoom in. I can see, what does the front of this place look like? I can look at pictures on the web and go, here's what the casino inside looks like in the Bellagio today. Or, what are the new water features? I can go onto their website. In other words, the research is much easier because somebody else, meaning people, have defined the world already. All I'm doing is playing in it. So I understand the culture of what's there already. I don't have to define it. I understand the language. I don't have to define it. I mean, I'd be able to speak it, but in a specific area in the world. So that's why, like, again, familiarity. If we say London, yes, I've been to London, but I'm not familiar with London in the depths I need to be. Whereas with Vegas, I'm familiar enough to be able to make some logical assumptions. And anything that's too far out there, I can ask somebody who I know who lives there. Hi, Larry. Hi, Tammy, who live there, and basically say, "Hey, does this make any sense at all?" And they'd be like, "No, we don't call it that. What do you call it?" And I can get the local colloquialisms. But when it comes down to something like London, that's harder because it's still in our world. Yeah, I can still Google map it, but their culture is different than my culture. Yeah, we speak the same language mostly. We don't use yous in some of our words where they do, and we say things differently and mean things differently. I won't mention any suggestions, any points of that, but
just if you're going to buy a fanny pack, be careful.
Yeah, exactly. And if you're going to buy a cigarette, it's not called that. So anyway, but that's kind of the thing. So I don't want to write there because I'm going to screw it up in some respect. However, now jump to the Queen Arthur stuff. I can make fun of it because it's very Monty Python. I can kind of do that where the people speak this way because you don't know. Nobody knows how they spoke way back then exactly. You know what I mean? So you can't really tell. Now, if it's all made up, okay, now it's anything I want it to be, but now I'm responsible for everything it is. So I'm responsible.
The pro is that you can make it all up. The con is that you have to make it all up.
Yeah. And you have to follow your own rules.
Right.
It can be a rough thing because now all of a sudden I have designed this thing and I'm like, oh, look at this. I am God. I have done wonders. Right. And then you go, shit, I put that building there. Now they can't get past it. Damn it. And
it's like really bad thing. Like, okay, New Testament.
Exactly. So I would say that the pros and cons are, familiarity is there for everybody in a world that exists. Research is easy. And as long as you're picking up a place that's a place you're familiar with, it just means that now you can focus on the characters and you don't have to worry about the world as much. Whereas the con of that is, you're basically tied into whatever's available in that world. And you have to know it well enough that the locals aren't going to sit there and, raise an eyebrow at you. So it's easier, I think. Is it fun? I don't think so. But when you go to create your own world, the pro is, again, yes, you can create it. And that's fun. I mean, it's a lot to do, but it's fun. I mean, the languages, the buildings, the locations, the cities, the towns, the cultures, who lives where, etc. All of that stuff is fun. The con is, are people going to buy into your world? That's a tough one because if they come in and you haven't, made your world explorable to them or interesting enough to them and so on, they're going to walk away. So that's a tough one. It's a risk that you're taking. Secondly, if they do get into your world, they might get really into your world. And if they do, that's going to be it's more important that you know exactly what's going on because they're going to be able to call bullshit on you if, the situation comes up where you screw up. Also, you can build your world into a corner. You can make yourself stuck in a corner and now all of a sudden you're going, shit, I shouldn't have done that. You can get around that. Okay, dwarves, come in, knock a hole in this mountain. You can come up with ways to make it happen. But that's the difference between comedy versus more serious high fantasy too. Because if I just say, shit, I need to get through that mountain, and what's going on? What is that clomping? Oh, they turn around and there's like 2,000 dwarves. We heard you needed to get through a mountain. We're here. Thump, 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 thump. Okay, now you're in comedy. In fantasy.
There's cheats. I mean, like Ellie Mata said, like he'll set his stuff 2,000 years before when there was something, but then an earthquake happened sometime in that. And, so there's little dodges and stuff like that you can do, but it's a lot harder you have to do it well for people to follow along with it.
Well, that's great, but that doesn't work if character A is looking at a mountain and all of a sudden, tomorrow it's gone.
Right. I mean, this would have to be like between books or series and stuff like that for the world. Yeah, you can't just say we took a nap and we sent the doozers to burrow through, and now
it's done.
Yeah.
Again, unless you have some type of magical way of doing it, you can come up with it, but you have to fit within the own rules of that magic. And that's going to bring us to the fact that we are done with locale. Let's just say we're done with locale in that. So hold on. Is it easier to introduce a world when talking as first person or in as second person? Or I think you mean third person view.
I would do it in second.
No, second person is a scary one, but I think she means third. But I don't think it really matters. It's just a different perspective. So one of them, I'm looking at the world like this. For me, I think it's author based. I think the answer to your question is that's based on the author and, what is most comfortable for you as an author. For me, third person is always easier to write. It's just much easier for me. I don't struggle with it. First person, I struggle. When I write in third person, man, I can just sit down and first person.
For world building, most people would look and say God mode is kind of the easiest, but then you're locked into it for the whole book. So that makes it harder.
Yeah. And I don't know. I would argue third person is still easier than God mode, because God mode really talks about the character perspective, where third person allows you to be the third person narrator, but still looking through the eyes of one character. You're not head hopping.
But
so it's the same idea.
About like when you log into EverQuest or something, or World of Warcraft, in the last 1,000 years, the nations rose and fell, and like we did in
so the narrator view.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah, I would agree. Again, I think it comes down to preference. For me, third person is much easier. Some people will say first. It's up to you as the author.
Yeah, and I've been locked into first mostly, so it's hopefully there are challenges, and sometimes it's like, I should have done it this other way, but you find a way around it.
Yes. So that's just talking about locale, unless anybody has additional questions about locale, or if you do. But that doesn't get into characters. That doesn't get into races. That doesn't get into things of that nature, because just because you have a locale doesn't mean you're done. I'm in Vegas. Yeah, but there's still werewolves, vampires, werebears. Now you're talking about, well, what does my world consist of as far as the supernatural creatures that live there? So that is part of world building. So in other words, everything in your world, what's contained in it, that's world building.
You got to think, what effect did they have on history? Maybe this thing is this way because of this race, and all these other things. It's
exactly. Yeah, exactly. And also, the question comes up: why did you make your mages a race? I've never seen that before. Exactly, because you've never seen that before. So I wanted to do it. Wizards are a race in the PPD. It seems weird. It seems odd, but they are. And that's their thing. So that also talks about, well, all right, since we're on the topic of magic, what are the different types of magic in the PPD and why? Okay, so I don't like the concept of a magical being so powerful that they can stop an army. That just doesn't make sense to me. Because if they are, then why is there an army at all? Because let's face it, a wizard or mage just comes out and goes like at an end of army. So it just seems dumb. So I always, and this is why I know Nonakin, it's like, well, they are powerful. Wizards are powerful, but only if they have enough of the substance that they need to be powerful. And that was always a problem. So like Wizfiddle, he could, drink a whole keg and he'd be like really powerful, probably enough to stop an army. Problem is, he'd be so shit-faced that he'd just fall down. He wouldn't be able to cast a spell, or he'd be so drunk he would slur his words and nothing would come out the way it's supposed to be.
Might have been the wrong army. He just pointed an army and went that way. Yeah.
He sloshed. So I wanted to make it so, there were certain things each one of these people got, that they also had to find their magical, power source.
There's only so much ostrich shit you could fit into a glove.
into a fingernail, right? You had to shove it under his fingernails. And so he had to do that. Well, how much room do you have? I don't care if you grow your fingernails really long, you got to get it under where the skin is. So, there's only so much that Trent had. And then you had the jokes about the person who, they had to be pierced through the heart with an arrow in order for them to do magic, which means that their magical career was very brief. But I wanted there to be consequences. So when it came to the PPD, you have standard consequences that you can see. Oh, you have to be around certain ley lines in the ground where the magic happens to come through, or magic makes you super tired, or magic requires a sacrifice of some sort, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, are the general things. Or, it could just be like Lord of the Rings style magic is based upon, what I need to do, morality almost, in respect of, somebody like Gandalf. But with the PPD, it was kind of different. Now, with the other authors, we kind of worked together on some of the ideas, but the idea being a mage can fire as much magic as they can until they are tired. And then that's it. So they can be super powerful, but, maybe they can only fire so many of those massive lightning spells or fireballs before those fireballs start getting weaker and weaker. And then finally, this person's just exhausted and beat. So that way they can't just run around doing as much as they want. However, if you're in the PPD, your tattoo enhances you, giving you more power, longer, and so on. And to make you almost uber, not quite, but almost uber.
And our protagonists have something special that puts them a little even above that. But
and you always should do that. Yeah, well, I think you should. I mean, personally, I think, or at least have the ability to grow into that, or be able to control it or something like that. Just because
there's
I
always
think people want larger than life
or something. Yeah, I mean,
yeah. So then we jump to wizards, and the concept there was, well, I don't want to just have wizards be somebody who holds a wand and does the same thing as a mage. So instead, wizards have to study. They're the ones who read the books, and they're going like this, and the whole deal. And they can do runes better than anybody else. They are able to do that, and they can read them better than anybody else. Doesn't mean other magic users can't read them, but they're not going to read them as detailed and intricately as a wizard can. So they can do these runes and such. They can cast spells, but only imbued spells. So if they have the wand, the reason why they have that wand is because they have pre-imbued that with a spell that, might have taken them a week to recite and go through all the processes to put it in there. Witches were basically the same idea as a wizard, except for they can't really cast spells that way. They have to use alchemy to do it. So they have the cauldron and all that kind of stuff. A little stereotypical, I know, but they had the cauldron, everything else. Pixies could use dust and so on, which was, effective, but they also could imbue items with the dust. Witches could as well. Actually, witches can only imbue items. That's pretty much their thing. So that's why they have all these pellets where they can, throw and stuff like that. Until, of course, we got to a specific character who gained the knowledge. And this is how you can get yourself past that. Something happens to specific, like Noah was just saying, that allows a specific character, usually your protagonist, to have a little bit depth, a little bit more capability than anybody else. But so like a pixie can imbue an object, but if they imbue, let's say, a pellet that would be an explosive, the shelf life of that diminishes very rapidly. So if if you use it in 10 seconds, boom, massive explosion. You use it in 30 minutes, boom, it's not quite as big. Use it in 2 hours, it barely does anything. So it diminishes. A witch can imbue an object that will last a very long time. And so they can stockpile. Wizards can imbue objects that last a long time. They also can stockpile. But somebody like a mage, they can't imbue objects the same way. And pixies can, but it doesn't last long. So they have to use their dust for that. Then, of course, you have the warlock. Explain warlock.
Yeah, that's hard because without getting into spoilers and stuff for this last one. But for the Mark and Amos warlocks, I mean, they are ones that have permanently bound to a demon, and there's a reason they're able to do that.
There you go.
And you'll get into the history of those in Tokyo Kaiju once that's finally out. But yeah, and most times we, like in the merging, that guy did Reese. Whenever he summoned demons, he was going to have some kind of contract with them to get it done.
Yep.
it would have been interesting to see what happened after that, because we saw in Soul Demon that there were people that had a contract with the demon and they ended up giving up their life for that,
Yeah.
So,
And here's the thing with the summoning of demons, like for Reese, he summoned them to utilize them as batteries, basically, so that he was a mage and he was like pretty much able to just go. That's because the demons were constantly feeding him energy to do that kind of thing, which is a similar effect in some other stories that you can check out. You also have the Sparkler, which is Fey only, and they take gems and they cast spells from a gem. And when you cast a spell, it drains the gem's beauty, luster, whatever, and turns it into a husk of what it was, and it can't be reused. So, you take the Hope Diamond or something like that, for example, and, that's what you use as your power source. The better the gem, the more pristine the gem, the larger the gem, just because it's a big gem, but if it's not pristine, it's not going to make much difference. But if you have a large gem that happens to be very pristine, that's going to give you the most strength to do a spell. So again, it puts a limitation on a Sparkler because you got to have the money to have these gems. And then you have to be able to say, boy, it's worth risking what I spent on this to cast this one spell. So it makes them so they're not too powerful. And so, how do you get around that? And those are things that, bad guys or good characters can do or whatever. Maybe it's because you're mixed with, a certain other, let's just make something up. So we have a Fey Sparkler who happens to also be mixed with, a mage, right? Or a wizard or something like that. And so they have, let's say it's a wizard or a witch. Let's use a witch. They created alchemy to imbue a gem with the ability for that gem to rebuild upon itself. I'm making shit up, but rebuild upon itself so that they can cast spells and this thing will continue, rebuilding. But it's not like it's going to just be in a constant state of, flux where it's just doing it or forever.
It's like having a cooldown on the spell.
It'll have a cooldown, right? So they cast a spell, but then it can sit there and start building itself back up, and then you can cast again, and then it builds itself back up, and that kind of thing. Yeah. So again, you're making shit up, but if you do make that up, you need to have a reason for it. Your readers have to be able to accept it, and it has to kind of make sense in your world, because if all of a sudden you're just like, oh crap, I'm stuck in a bad spot, I'm just going to do this. That's Platoon F. Now you've moved into pure comedy. And if that's what you want to do, that's totally fine. Then you have to have some imp character who goes, what's the big deal? Here's another diamond, and everything else or whatever. Oh, I could just, put me in the diamond and I'll fix it real time with little tinker tools and stuff like that. And then he goes in there and he goes, shit, I'm stuck in a diamond, whatever. You can do those things. You can make them up. But again, stick to your rules, stick to the reasons why you're doing things.
Yeah, because if you're going to break your world, you better have a way to explain why you've done it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because even Warlocks, you could say that Mark almost kind of does that, because in the beginning, he would the limitation was how long Bert's energy and stuff would last together, and then when they merged, they're kind of wiped out. Now Mark has a way to replenish his energy, but it doesn't work all that well, and Bert can too, but only in a very specific way. I'm just kind of avoiding spoilers, but
I know it's hard.
Yeah, Mark does have limitations, and we'll get into that, and also why the other Warlocks were not as powerful as he is. So, it can seem like someone is a major badass, and they are, but still, you look at all these superheroes, everything else. 90% of them, if you shoot them in the brain, they're still dead.
Yeah. Well, and then jump over to Harry Potter. They find their specific wand that matches them. They're sorted into a particular house. They have those types of things that they have to say the words properly. They have to flick it properly.
So the guy with the stutter really didn't work out.
Right. Yeah. And again, it's your world. You can take influences from everybody else. You can follow what somebody else did if you want to, or you can say, oh, I'm going to add some nuances of my own. You don't have to. It's not like it's required that you do that, because there are some standardized tropes out there that people have said, okay, this is cool. I saw a humorous thing the other day. This person said, I just got a Goodreads review about what was it? It says how it was unrealistic. My urban fantasy about a vampire on a train was unrealistic, and everything else. And he goes, "Yeah, sorry, that was what was unrealistic," or something to that effect.
I saw the same one about vampires on a submarine or boat or something like that.
Submarine, that's what it was. Yeah, submarine. Vampires on a submarine. It's like, it was unrealistic. Sorry, that was unrealistic. It's like vampires are unrealistic. Let's face it. But it's funny what people will say. It proves a point, though. People will suspend belief for the vampire side, but if the rest of what you're doing doesn't make any damn sense at all, you have a problem.
See, and in that one, depending on what vampire books they've read, because there was the things that they can't cross rushing water and stuff like that.
Right.
So, that could have been like, well, you can't go in a submarine. You're going across the water.
Right.
So
the mirrors and the light.
Yeah, and where you explain it that way to where they don't use silver, so all this other stuff. I mean, when it's your world, you can say yes, but, and then you fixed it.
It is a risk, though.
Yeah,
it is a risk, and that's kind of the thing. That comes back down to you again. I mean, you guys have read our books. You know that we don't follow standard tropes a lot of times, and that's because we do comedy. So to me, it's almost like breaking the rules is something that I need to do. If I don't do that, I'm just writing what everybody else is writing, and that's boring to me.
Yeah, and there could be some that are just weird. Like damn near everyone in my books have at least two names. I mean, because they've all have a secret identity for some reason, and that's kind of a running joke right now.
And that's common actually in fantasy, especially with wizards and mages, because you don't want somebody to know your true name.
Right, and even Aragorn and Strider. I mean, from Lord of the Rings. Mm-hmm. So it's you do it how you want to do it. Fred Saberhagen had his Dracula series that was kind of interesting, and he might have been one of the first ones to use like a video camera to get around it. And What We Do in the Shadows goes over that.
Great show.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to remember what his name was when he owned the bar, but that's.
Right, Matt Berry character.
Yeah.
And again, comedy.
Yeah, but they still do kind of stick to they stretch things out. Like he'll be like fucking bat, and but
yeah,
they take the rules of it seriously, but they don't take the rest of it seriously.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be the final piece of the world building. Let's talk about that real quick. Is your world based upon something that you would consider high fantasy or serious or dark or dismal or post-apocalyptic? And even in any of those elements, I won't say dark and dismal, but let's say post-apocalyptic, fantasy, sci-fi, romance, whatever, urban fantasy. In those, is your book serious? Is your, because if you're in science fiction and it's serious, there are two levels of that. There's hard sci-fi, which means that you better know what you're talking about as far as science is concerned, or at least understand enough, because people who read hard sci-fi typically are going to know what's going on in real science today, and they can kind of say, yeah, okay, we'll give you the leeway of where you're going with that. But for example, Star Wars is not hard sci-fi.
No, it's space opera, which is what I like.
Yeah, which is
hard sci-fi.
Sure, which is great. And I do like some hard sci-fi. It depends on how it's done. If it gets too far into the weeds, ugh. But I mean, it can get crazy where it's literally like reading a science book.
Right.
But so if you better know what you're doing if you're going to go into there. If you're going into high fantasy, the other sides of sci-fi, there's multiple areas. Obviously,
especially if you do military sci-fi, you better know your shit, because you're going to attract the group that's going to nail you on every single bit. Troops don't act that way. Weapons don't work this way. There's a reason I don't put guns, other than I don't really like guns that much, and mine very much. I don't want someone to say, no, an AK-47 doesn't work this way. No, this one is, you don't have to do this, whatever. The rifling is different on that. Because I don't care. I'll say it's a gun, it shot somebody. I'm not going to get into that kind of stuff.
Into the level of detail for that, right? That's not your focus, and that's understandable. It's like, as an example of this, you know, I have been called out for Platoon F's ranking structure on the bridge. And they're going, well, no, a spaceship is a naval vessel, therefore you have to follow navals. But you're calling these guys space marines, and if they're space marines, then they have to follow marines and everything else. And my response is very simple: they're from Phyllian, dipshit. They're not from the Earth. So they're not, even if they were from the Earth, they're not from the United States. You know, they're from some other continent or whatever who doesn't follow. So what these people are doing is, again, this goes back to the law of familiarity. These people are putting their military experience onto my book, right? And that's fine. They can do that. But as I point out, on the land of Phyllian, it's already, I mean, the world of Phyllian, why do I call it Phyllian? I don't mean that. Segnol. Phyllian was the map over here that I was looking at. On Segnol, the Segnol space, and I point that out in caps, Segnol, Space Marine Corps. It's because they're from that planet. And everything on that planet's fucked up. I mean, you can, so I'm like, so let me get this straight. You can forgive the ridiculousness of rails in space that ships have to travel on. You can forgive that, but the military structure just ruins it for you. Really? You know, and I'm just like, you're not for this book. But at the same time, again, yes, the ranks were purposefully done that way. I did that on purpose. I looked at what are the ranks for militaries and the different things. And I went, oh, I like the sound of that one and the sound of the sound of that one. And I knew where the ranking structure was. So I still kept that, you know, concept. But I knew these, you know, things, but I wanted this name and this name and that name and this name and everything else. I'm not creating Star Trek here, you know? And so I did that on purpose. And of course I wanted Rear Admiral Parfait, duh, right? And so, you know, I wanted to do those types of things and set it up differently. And I didn't want it to be based on specifically on our military, right? I wanted to be based upon Segnol's military, their command structure and how they did things. But that really bothered people, some people. And yet other people, I was never in the military. And yet I have received emails from people saying, wow, this is, you know, I had COs who were just like what you were talking about. I have had COs just like Parfait. I mean, I've had more than one email about that. I'm like, really? I mean, I know he was based on a real guy, but that guy was not in the military. So to have COs like that, and also to have commands, you know, setups like they had faced and seeing the things that they had faced, I'm like, that's impressive. I mean, I guess I watched the right movies because I don't know firsthand, you know, about that stuff. So again, since I didn't know, I had to make it a comedy. I'm not going to sit there and try to actually be Joe military. I've never been in the military. I don't have that experience. My father was, but yeah.
As long as you don't set it on Earth and you don't set it in the present, I mean, yeah. I mean, who's to say how you can't say this is wrong? For all we know, they're not speaking English. Why would they be? They're not from.
That's why they had universal translators, and they had to turn them on when they landed here on Earth because they couldn't understand the people of Earth. Why? Because they don't speak English. They speak Segnolian.
So again, yeah, if you're doing urban fantasy or whatever, where you have real stuff, that's the advantage. You can pull all that, but then everything else you steal. I mean, you can steal whole cities and just change names if you feel like it. I mean,
and it's one reason why some folks in urban fantasy stick with magic. And just to let you know, based on a survey that I ran recently, the highest, most interesting character type that urban fantasy readers like are wizards, sorcerers, that type of character. Then it goes down to witch and such like that. Magic was number one. Dragon was like fourth. And so on. Then you would think, well, Jinn, that'd be really cool because their ability with their, you know, that is kind of a form of magic, you know, but the ability to mess with the dreams and stuff. Nope, that was like 33%. So when you're saying I want to write something that's going to appeal to a mass amount of people, 33% ain't it. 78% or 80-some%. That's it. That's the one that you kind of want to think about. The reason
people say if you like Harry Dresden, you will like.
Exactly. You know. Exactly. Yeah. So back to like the you know, the themes of things. So it should be noted when you say hard sci-fi, that's actually wrong. It's hard science fiction. Sci-fi denotes it's not hard science fiction. Science fiction is still based more in reality, but it doesn't have to be scientifically accurate or even, projected to be at some point. Science fiction can still be less campy. So Star Wars, for example, is not science fiction. It's sci-fi.
Yeah. And science fiction doesn't have to be in space. Science and fiction. I mean, they say the first science fiction was Frankenstein. So, I mean, most people picture a spaceship when you say science fiction, but Jurassic Park is science fiction.
Yeah. And you have, so science fiction is also alien.
Right.
It gets a little weird, when the visual of it, but it is science fiction. It's not hard sci-fi or hard science fiction, I should say, but it is science fiction. But sci-fi has become part of the vernacular of meaning science fiction. But if you're being, pedantic about it, what you're really saying is you have hard science fiction, sci-fi. And when you jump into sci-fi, then you can start going, okay, it doesn't have to really be based on, stuff. It's I'm flying around in space, or I'm, doing whatever. I'm running into aliens, or, Welcome to Earth. What was that? Independence Day. Sci-fi. That's really what that is. It's not intended to be accurate. It's not intended to be more serious. Even though there might be serious elements to it, like Deep Impact, for example. We talked about that a little bit last week. The asteroid is coming. It's going to blow up the Earth. What do we do? All that kind of stuff. It's got elements of both. It's got sci-fi-ish science fiction to it. So, I mean, it does bleed. There are areas where it bleeds. How historically accurate it is, when you start getting to the, and I'm not going to spoil it for anybody, but when you start getting to certain points of the movie, you start going, really? As soon as you start doing that, if you have, a scientific mind at all, you start doing that kind of stuff. Or like when I watch like certain shows where they show programmers are all of a sudden connecting this to that, to this, to that, in order to make this happen. And they're like, yes, that'll work.
And then,
what's that?
I'm in the Pentagon.
Yeah.
Back in the 56K days, or the 33, and all this other stuff.
Yeah. I mean, there's certain things as a developer, I look at that and I just go, oh God, why couldn't they just have had some expert tell them you can't do that? And probably an expert did. They said, you can't do that. And they said, well, it's what the story needs, so we're doing it anyway. It's like, you just immediately lost credibility with a lot of people by doing it. So set your rules ahead of time. Understand, oh, this is comedy, or this is meant to be a little bit off, or make it so this particular character has an ability to make that happen. Again, you've just removed yourself from science fiction by doing it, and you've moved right into sci-fi. So it's this, this little element that goes like that.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember which one was. Maybe is the core, because like where the guy like did something with like aluminum foil on a phone. He's like, and now you have free phone for life. He took, I mean, that whole movie was ridiculous, but I mean,
there was also something where this guy was connecting multiple ISDN lines together and then having those connect to a satellite dish, and that made everything so much faster. No, it didn't. It wouldn't even fucking work. It's just stupid, but whatever. But then move over to fantasy. Same idea. Fantasy can be high fantasy, which means it's serious. It's the science fiction, or the hard science fiction of fantasy is really what that is. You're speaking, the characters are speaking eloquently. They're using their own language. You're very careful about culture and making sure that all of that flows through. And it's deep, to do that. I can't read it personally. To me, it's just like, ugh. Then you have fantasy, which goes back into the Steven Erikson area and such like that. High fantasy is Lord of the Rings, which is to me really hard to read. But it is Lord of the Rings. It's that kind of thing. And that's because that's kind of where it kicked, right? Off.
Whereas the movie of the Lord of the Rings is much less.
Yeah, it's fantasy. Yeah, that's just standard fantasy is what that is. It's got its moments. But
quiver that never runs out of arrows until the plot demands it and stuff like that.
Exactly. So, you have those different levels as well. And then, of course, you move into comedy where you have Discworld, Myth Adventures, Ononikin. You have these different areas where you move into the comedic side. And even those have some basis in reality, but they can get away with more stuff. So I'll be honest with you. The reason why I write comedy, besides the fact that I just find a lot of shit funny, is that it doesn't tie me down to being perfect about certain things. If I need something to happen, I can comedically come up with a way to make it happen. So I can escape, these corners that I've driven myself into if I need to. In some respects, that's good. I mean, how do you think, one of the reasons why Ian went through hell is because he wanted to get to the Valkyries. So in the event, when later on he needed to get away, there you go. You can have those types of things that you make up that still work in your world and that people will follow, but they'll more readily follow if they recognize that what you're doing is comedic. With Platoon F, you step on board and you have a robot who just says, yeah, I just throw a bunch of wires together until the shit sticks to the wall. And, hey, it worked and everything else. And then he comes up with a name for it. And, people laugh and they recognize that's part of the joke. Whereas other people read it and they went, I don't understand why this person thinks they write, science fiction. This isn't science fiction. This is crap and blah, blah, blah. It's like, it's because you don't get the joke. You don't get it.
Trying to remember the guy's name, Voltaire, for music. He has a song called the USS Make Shit Up. It says bounce a particle beam off the rear deflector disc. We're doing something. We make up shit as we wish. I can find the song and put it for if people want to do it. But so if we're find we're in a bind, we'll just make some shit up, and then and that's what they did, and so.
And you're totally allowed to do that if you set that as your ground rules starting out. What sucks is when you start out writing high fantasy, for example, and it slowly deteriorates into fantasy and slowly deteriorates further into whatever the hell you want it to be, because you knocked yourself into a corner here. And so it can't go any further, but you're selling copies, so you want it to go further. And so next thing you know, you're way over here. And some people will follow you anyway, but some people are going to go, you just sold out. That's what you did. Yeah. So if you're going to sell out, do it before you start.
And you see it a lot with series that get really long and where you get power creep, and then they really start just kind of throwing stuff at the wall. Like the Dragon Ball Z saga. I mean, you've got people that can blow up the earth by pointing at it, but they're still punching each other, every single time. And just, you have to be able to suspend disbelief in that kind of stuff.
Well, there was a time Dresden did that, right? I mean, I'm sorry, it now does that. With Dresden, it was just, solving the cases and stuff like that. But over the course of time, now over the course of time, it's the world is in danger, and everything else. And you kind of have to grow your character in that direction over the course of time. There's otherwise, it's literally, unless you're writing mystery and that's really what you're doing, then it's solve this mystery and that mystery. But even then, it's got to be unique, different mysteries.
Because there's the Glenn Cook ones. I forget, it's like silver, blues, copper, something. He does like metal ones. They're all kind of.
Talk about Black Company.
Same guy. But these are more kind of funnier mysteries.
Okay.
Set in a fantasy world, kind of a disc world. Everyone says disc world, everything, but myth-ish. Mm-hmm. He never really has powers or grows anything, but it's like the cozy mystery to where the normal person figures out the thing and does the Columbo. Mm-hmm. So you don't have to have power creep in that. You just, you build the relationships between the characters as the series moves on. People grow and aren't static, so you can do that way. But if you're doing the action ones, if you don't check them in some way, eventually they become basically a god. And we all know an author that's done that.
Yeah, but even if you do that, where it's just like, the Columbo method and so on, eventually that starts getting tired. And what's really interesting is it's like, so you do Columbo and they're short little stories and stuff like that. You do 25 of them, 30 of them. People are like, these are a lot of fun. I enjoyed them. But then it starts kind of getting worn out. But then it's interesting because then you do like, Jane the Sleuth or whatever. And it's pretty much the same thing. It's just that they're so familiar with Columbo that there's nothing really new. about Columbo, for them to learn and understand. They've gotten too familiar with the character, which proves a point of what we discussed before. In my opinion, character is more important than plot, because after a while, the character has gotten, so familiar with the people. It's really what they've been reading all along. Is not what's this fun adventure, but what am I learning about this character? How's this character growing to the point where they finally have reached the area where I know them so well, it's the 7-year itch. It's time to cheat on them, and find someone else. And that's why people say, oh, I'd love to see a spinoff of this character in this book. Well, yeah, because you want to learn more about that character. You've already gotten to the point now with this character where you know them like the back of your hand. Sure, they're familiar. They're still fun. Maybe you want to see a book from them, once every couple of years because, I wonder what kind of adventure is going to happen now or whatever. But just the constant churn of that same character over and over and over again eventually is going to wear out.
Yeah, unless you do something, like to set them in a new setting, or you get rid of the people around them, and that, and then sometime, depending on how you do it, you're going to upset people because they say you're just doing it to sell books. That person wouldn't do that. And then,
Yeah.
And sometimes really that's true. And because someone's written themselves into a corner and their series is popular, so they're like, okay, well, that person's got to go because I can't have a love interest that keeps going. They've got to,
Eventually, you need to hook up with them or they need to disappear or something. Yeah, I agree. And so where do you end up? You end up going, I'm going to do a spinoff character then. Or, I'm going to do a different, like we did, a different precinct or whatever in that instance. I think you can go a long way with a character, especially, if they're seriously flawed. But I do believe that there comes a time where, it's not so much that the story, I mean, you can, I hate to say it this way, but it seems to be true. If you look at any, what is the old saying about Shakespeare? There's only like 7 real stories anyway.
Right.
7 real trope, sequences, but it's kind of true. I mean, okay, there's a wizard here that I love. Okay, there's a wizard here that I love. There's a wizard over here that I love. This one's in, New York. This one's in Southeast Asia. This one's in Vegas. But they're all wizards. They're all, casting the same types of spells, and they all have a bad guy or, bad girl or bad people or whatever that they're trying to stop. It's a similar trope. I mean, all the way through it. It's a similar plot line all the way through it. What's different is how that person approaches it. That's what makes the whole difference. It's entirely the thing. And that comes, again, back to it's more about character than it is about plot. So, yeah, you've designed your world. You've designed your location. You've picked where you're going to be. You've chosen your supernatural types. You've said, am I high fantasy? Am I low fantasy? Am I comedic fantasy, or my hard sci-fi or science fiction, versus sci-fi, space opera, military. I mean, you can go all of these different subgenres into it. Ultimately, though, character is in bad situation. Bad character is trying to cause some shit that's messing up character. Character has to figure out a way to get to the point where they interface with bad guy, blow up bad guy, whatever, or situation, and destroy. The plots are not that dissimilar. If you start really, this is why we tell people with writing boot camps, it kind of sucks because you start studying what the person's doing more than just enjoying the ride. But when you do that, what you'll find out is if you sat down and plotted like 20 different books from your favorite authors, different ones, you're still going to start going, that's not that different. How they get there is different. That's important. But the general rule of bad werewolf needs to be stopped. Bad vampire needs to be stopped. What's the difference? One's a werewolf, one's a vampire. Where they're located, that's a difference, and so on. But your real difference, how does your character deal with it? That's the difference. Who is your character dealing with and interfacing with to deal with bad vampire or bad werewolf or whatever? That's the difference. That's the part that's interesting to people. And a lot of times authors don't see that. They go, I have to come up with something so fresh and new and so different. It's like most of the time when people do that, they don't succeed. Now and then, yes, you find one person who does something and it just happens to And then what happens? Everybody does that.
Right.
You know, that's, you have trendsetters. Yes. But here's the thing. How many are there? You know, could it be you? Sure. It could absolutely, it could absolutely be you. Does that mean, am I saying you should never try? No, you should probably try. I mean, if you think you have something totally fresh that nobody else has done, do it. By all, of course, do it. However, if you're not sure that you have that particular, story just yet, well, then here's a suite of tropes that you can work with. And so is here and here and here and here. There's 100 of them. So instead, create a character that fits while you're building the thing that you believe is going to be that new trend. Cool. Get your chops down. Get your expertise down. Then when you want to take a shot at that thing, you have the ability to do it. It's not like it's like, wow, I have this new idea for building a house. I have no idea how to use a saw, but I have this idea. I'm going to go build a house. Here's a better idea. Start learning how to use a saw. Learn how to use a hammer, learn how to measure properly, go through all that process, learn what it takes to build specific things. And when you're done and you've built 20, 30, 40, 50 houses, now go build the one that you think you can build, that's going to revolutionize the world, because now you have the expertise to do it. Until then, it's still possible, but it's hard.
And if you're going traditional route versus indie, as far as trends go, if you're going to try and get published by a traditional publisher, don't go for it. By the time your book ends up out in the market, they've moved on to this 2 or 3 trends past that. If you're someone that can get a book out in a month, yeah, you can chase like Academy and whatever's hot at the moment. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's one of those things that you've got to be able to see, what kind of writer am I? Am I able to adapt to something I don't like writing because it's hot right now? I mean, and then you have to know the tropes for building that world. I mean,
yeah. What's your purpose? I mean, again, we kind of touched on this before. Is your purpose to make money? Is your purpose to just write stories because you love to? What is your purpose? Are you trying to make a living? I mean, honestly, I am I'm trying to make a living I am making a living at this, but it's like, but here's the thing. I also can't just write, like, for example, Academy. That would be really hard for me to do. Reverse harem. I can't do that stuff. All right. It just, I don't want to. So I'll sit there in front of the keyboard just staring at it. So I have to have the interest. I have to have the desire. Some people don't. Some people are just like, no, this is a business. I'm going to sit down, crack my knuckles. And I'm just like, I'm writing this today. And no problem. And they write wonderfully. They do great. They write great stories because they understand stories are, again, very similar across the board. So when you sit down and say, I just don't have a story. Bullshit. Stories aren't that hard to create. If you're running into that problem, you're overthinking it. Especially if you're an author who has been doing this for a while, it's not that hard to come up with stories. What's hard is coming up with characters that can fit in that story, and also that perspective of it, and your desire to write that story based on what genre and so on that you're in. Again, some people, ghost writers, for example, no problem. They just sit down and go like this. All right, you want me to write, sweet romance with cowboys? And yes, that's what I want. Okay. And what's the general idea here? Oh, I want this, this, and this, and this. They come up with a thing. They give them an outline. The person says, yes, that's exactly what I want. Ghostwriter sits down and just goes, types, and hands them over a story. And they say, this is perfect. This is exactly what I wanted. Great. Where's my $3,000, $5,000, whatever? They get paid. The person then puts their name on it, slaps it out there, and goes and makes money. And yes, a lot of authors that you might think write their own books do just that. Not all of them. I don't want to say a lot. Maybe that's not fair, but I would say I know about 5 authors who do that very thing in the urban fantasy area. They do that very thing. Sure, they come up with the ideas. They sit there and come up with, here's the plan, here's what I'm looking for, here's the character types, and so on and so forth. But then they hand it to somebody else, and that other person writes it for them while they go to the next thing.
Yeah, and some of them will share credit on the books. Others will only put their name on, or put a third name on for so they don't saturate their pen name. They'll create a new one and everything else.
And they'll create a name. It's not even a real person.
Right.
Yeah. So you have that kind of thing. And I'm not really looking down at that, because the reason I say that is not everybody can write, but it doesn't mean everybody is it doesn't mean people don't have the ability to tell great stories. So, coming up with great ideas and to tell great stories and so on and so forth, that's, great. And it's a wonderful thing. But when they sit down in front of the computer, Chris Young's a good example of that. He's really good at coming up with, really fun stories, great ideas and stuff like that. But when he sits down to actually write, it's just not his thing. He's just not good at it. And so on. It's just, he literally does like 3 pages of one paragraph. And that includes everybody's dialogue talking to each other. It's just not he just doesn't have that ability, but that's fine. He's a really good storyteller. And so again, I'm not trying to put down anybody who uses ghostwriters, unless I will say it kind of bugs me if they're just using it to churn out like a farm of books and they don't really care, then it's just for money. That does bother me. I mean, I think you should care enough to say, I think doing that to me means you don't care about the reader at all. You just care about their money. And that bugs me. Because I mean, without the readers, you're not doing this anyway. And so, I don't know, pet peeve. It bothers me personally, but to each his own, as they say.
Yeah. And there are authors that eventually they lose quality control because they just worry about the deadlines. They hand it off to someone and then that person plagiarizes, and things like that. So there are risks to it.
Which is actually a really good point. We're at past 1 o'clock at this point, so we're going to have to stop. But I just want to bring this up. Just because you love specific authors and everything else, you don't take what they did and just say, this is my own thing and everything else. It's one of the reasons why I struggle to read contemporary authors. It's one of the reasons why if an author will say to me, just out of the blue, hey, I'm writing something in your world, fan fiction and stuff like that, I'm like, I can't read it. Thanks, but I can't read it. I mean, you can't stop somebody from writing fan fiction. That's cool. But it's like, I can't read it because if I do, and then next thing you know, 2 books from now, my story comes out and it's the same thing that, you wrote. That's kind of me plagiarizing you. I may not do it on purpose, but it could just happen. And so I don't read anything. And if a person sends something to me and says, hey, will you read this thing? I generally say, no, I won't. But, and then I direct them. I say, hey, go to this reading group or this author group and everything else. And there's a honest reason for that is I don't want to accidentally, use your idea. So I just let my ideas just kind of like bing, whatever happens. And there they go. Does that mean I'm not influenced by people I've read in the past? Of course I am. I mean, you can't help that. Does that mean, I mean, Monty Python, you could see that all through, what I do. But, at the same time, I'm not going to go, bring out your dead, bing, I'm not going to do that. That's theirs. And so on. So now some people will say, wow, this is very similar to what I read in Discworld for like A Quest of Undoing. And I'm just like, I had not read Discworld at the time. But again, you could probably look at it and say, it feels similar to Myth Adventures. Yeah, it does. But it doesn't mean I'm taking stuff from theirs. But we're all influenced. It's okay to be influenced. Just be careful about saying, oh, I'm going to use E-index and I'm going to create this. Wait a minute. No, create your own character and do that. That kind of thing. Build your own world. It's really important because it's also good for you just as a writer to learn to let the characters talk to you. If you're letting somebody else's characters talk to you, it's not yours, it's somebody else's. So let your own characters talk. Create your own characters. Sure, you can use Mark as the inspiration for your character Joe or whatever, but don't make them Mark because what sense does that make? Let them come from your own head.
Yeah, you're not me or John anyway, so they're going to sound like you anyway. They're not going to sound like me because You're not me. So
they're not going to sound like Mark.
Yeah,
because Mark lives in your head. They're not going to sound like Ian because Ian lives in my head. So I would argue that Bert is you. So yeah.
They're all to different extents, but yeah.
Well, sure.
Bert is the most, yeah. But yeah. So anyway, that's the problem I have with fan fiction. I mean, even with co-writing series where one person is just giving like a few ideas or something, and then having many authors write in the same series, is that there has to be someone going through and making a pass to where it still sounds like that character. Right. So it's easier just to make up your own characters and make them sound how you want them to, because it's going to be part coming out of your head. If you try and sound like us, it's not going to be as good as if you try to sound like you.
Exactly. And if PPD is a perfect example of that. You guys, I didn't say, hey, Noah, will you write an Ian Dex book? Nope. I didn't say, will you write a Piper and Payne book or a Ren Cooper book or a Sinister book? No. I said, hey, do you want to write in the PPD? Create your own precinct, your own characters. We'll come up with some ideas, some basic gist of it. We'll go back and forth, but they're yours. They're your characters. So, do that. And I talked to Eric. I said, do you want to do one? He's like, yeah. I was like, okay, Seattle. Totally different characters. You're not using the characters that, I didn't say, hey, let's all write in Las Vegas. No, that doesn't make sense to me, because you're not going to convey Ian Dex right, because he lives in my head, not yours. And I'm not going to convey Bert right, because he lives in your head, not mine. Right. So for me, the developmental edit side of that is, how smooth is this going? Are there jumps? Are there things that don't make sense? How does it work within the rest of the world? All that kind of stuff was the real thing. But other than that, go have fun. Or, hey, here's an idea that I think might be funny. Throw this in or whatever. And we discuss. But, same thing with Eric and Ben and so on in Orlando. It was just a case of, how does this work? So we work together to build what that's going to be. But then the characters live in your head, not mine, and so it doesn't make any sense, which is why I would never say to you, hey, write a Whizfiddle book. No, that makes no sense, because Whizfiddle lives here,
Yeah. Everyone's seen when someone has gone and continued a series by a dead author, and it just isn't the same.
It isn't the same. It does not work. So it's
and
unfortunate.
When people say this show sucks now because the showrunner has changed or something like that.
Yeah.
Where they will have a lot of different people writing scripts, but then the same group of writers, even though it will change through time, will all pitch in jokes and everything else, and it will feel like that show. But the showrunner changes, like in Community and stuff like that. You can tell it's not the same show. It becomes a version of fan fiction at that point.
Yeah. Exactly. And that's why we worry about Firefly if it gets rebooted, right? Since Joss Whedon is probably not going to be involved in it, then what are we doing? Because that's, and again, the different episodes were written by different people, but you had the same person who was guiding the ship, right? So the PPD is the PPD. Whether you read Southeast Asia, Seattle, New York, Badlands, Sinister, Vegas, Shadow, Netherworld, it's the PPD. You can tell. You can see the humor style, the way that things happen, how the world is built, how the magic works, and everything else, is because if anybody started going way off on a friggin' tangent, I went, no, that's not the PPD. Come back. And I had to do that a lot, especially in the earlier books, because people had to be like, no, I got to steer you back here. Everything else. Not that their ideas were bad. They just weren't PPD. You got to be in the right spot. And so that's why there's consistency. Even though there's different precincts, there's still consistency, because that's my job. My job was to say, okay, I'm writing in these worlds, but even though you're writing in this world, you still are in this world. And since you're in here, you got to follow the rules of this. And when we said, I need to bend the rules in this. All right, then we have to sit down and figure out how to make that happen. And just like you and I did for, hours at a time, we'd say, yeah, but what about this? And we go, okay, how can we make that work where it doesn't fuck up everything? And we would do that. That's world building. That's what we're talking about. So it doesn't mean that once you build it, you're screwed. It just means, how can we make something that we need to make work? How can we make it work where it doesn't break all the rules? We got to be careful about that, because people are going to notice.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, that's, we went long. I love these conversations. I think they're fun. But we did kind of go long here. So anyway, I thought it was a great discussion.
Yeah. And hopefully it's useful for people that are listening or watching. I hope you guys are writing your own stories. Like I say each time, share them if you want to, not fan fiction, but share your own stories, your own characters.
Yeah.
Share them with each other.
Join the Dysfunctional Writing Club and start talking in there and sharing ideas back and forth. Don't be shy. Just, hey, I wrote something. It's, only a few paragraphs long, but I thought it was cute. What do you guys think? And get feedback and go back and forth and learn as an author, learn to take feedback. It's hard sometimes. I know you get criticisms and you're just like, oh, I'm never going to write again. Yeah, don't do that. Just freaking keep writing. I mean, you'll get better. You'll improve.
And if you write enough things and send enough things off, the chances are you'll get a thicker skin. Yeah. So don't be afraid to send out stuff that you've written. Don't put your heart into it to the point if it gets rejected, because your early ones probably will. That's not the end of the world. It could have just been the fact this particular person out of the billions on the planet didn't like it.
Hey, go to your favorite books that you've ever read. You're going to find 1-star or 2-star reviews. Just happens. People not everybody is pleased. It's just the way it goes. A reminder, next week, January 16th, we have Martha Carr on. So if you want, go check out Martha Carr. Go on to Amazon, type in Martha Carr, Carr, and check out some of her stuff. And she'll be here next week. And then after the week after that, we will be going back to Writers Bootcamp, and then we're going to have Ben Zackheim on the 30th once we do that launch. I guess the week after Martha, we'll have to decide what we're going to do for Writing Bootcamp, but we'll do something. It'll be fun. Aside from that, I think that's it, unless you have anything else to add.
Ben's will probably be fun because that'll be my daughter's 3rd birthday, so I'll probably be hyped up on cake and stuff by the time we get there. I'll be on a sugar high. And she'll be screaming downstairs, running around. So that might be fun. It'd be the perfect week. Ben loves that.
Yeah, exactly. All right, guys. Great. Thanks again for joining us. And we will see you next week.